first, the sculpture was praised, lifelike, emotional, impossibly detailed. But one visitor froze. Not because the art moved them, but because the face did. It wasn't familiar in a vague way. It was familiar in a missing person's poster way. And when they leaned closer, the gallery went silent. The artist was known for one thing: realism taken too far. His name was Marcus Holt, though he rarely used it in full. Just Holt on the plaques. Just Holt in the glossy exhibition catalogs. Just Holt whispered in the kind of high-end art circles where a single name carries more weight than a full biography. His sculptures didn't exaggerate the human form. They preserved it with an accuracy that crossed the line from impressive to unsettling. Veins visible just beneath the surface of the skin. Fingernails with the subtle ridges of real keratin growth. Posture that suggested weight, gravity, the pull of an actual spine supporting actual mass. Even tension in the hands, the slight curl of fingers that hadn't quite relaxed, the tendons visible at the wrist. Critics called it uncomfortable genius. One reviewer wrote, "Holt doesn't sculpt the human form. He captures the exact moment before humanity slips away." Another noted, "His work exists in the uncanny valley between art and reality. We should be disturbed. Instead, we're mesmerized." He never explained his process. No assistance. No behind-the-scenes footage for documentary crews who begged for access. No unfinished work displayed in studio visits because there were no studio visits. The few journalists who tried to profile him came away with vague quotes about respecting the boundary between creation and observation, and preserving the sanctity of the artistic moment. Every piece appeared complete and permanent. He worked in cycles, they said, periods of intense privacy followed by sudden exhibitions. He would disappear for months, sometimes longer, ignoring calls from galleries and agents. Then, without warning, he would emerge with something new. Something that made the art world hold its breath. His sculptures had a quality that photographs couldn't quite capture. People who viewed them in person often described a strange sensation, a feeling that the figures weren't merely realistic but preserved, as if they had been living things that agreed to be still, forever. The art community loved him. The art community defended him when critics suggested his work glorified objectification, when ethicists questioned the implications of creating such realistic human forms, when psychologists wrote papers about the viewer's response to hyperrealism approaching the threshold of death. Art isn't comfortable, his defenders would say. Art challenges. Art disturbs. If you're not unsettled, you're not paying attention. Looking back, that defense takes on a different meaning entirely. For 8 years, the exhibitions traveled. London first. The Serpentine Gallery hosted his breakthrough show. 6 figures, all in positions of collapse or surrender. The weight of being, he called it. Critics praised the emotional rawness. One figure, a woman slumped against an invisible wall, won the Turner Prize consideration. Then Paris, Berlin, New York, Miami during Art Basel, Seoul, Melbourne, Singapore. Each exhibition expanded. 8 pieces, 10, 12, each one more stunning than the last, and each one more disturbing, though few admitted it at the time. There was the series called Interrupted Moments. Figures frozen mid-step, mid-gesture, mid-breath. The expression on their faces suggested not peaceful meditation but sudden cessation, as if someone had pressed pause on life itself. There was the Silence Collection. Women with hands near their throats, eyes wide, mouths slightly parted. The artist's statement claimed it was about voices unheard in modern society. People photographed themselves next to these pieces, posted them online, wrote essays about feminine rage and societal suppression. No one asked why all the figures were women. No one questioned why they all appeared to be in their 20s and 30s. No one wondered about the perfect diversity, different ethnicities, different body types, different features, as if chosen deliberately to represent a spectrum. The art world celebrated inclusivity. They should have noticed the pattern. For years, the exhibitions traveled. And for years, women disappeared. Different cities, different backgrounds, no obvious connection. In London, a graduate student named Emma Mitchell missed her thesis defense. Her apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her phone and wallet were gone, suggesting she'd left voluntarily. Her family insisted she would never abandon her degree. The investigation lasted 6 weeks before being filed as a voluntary missing person case. In Paris, a waitress named Sophie Laurent didn't show up for her shift at a cafe in the Marais. Colleagues said she'd mentioned wanting to travel, maybe go south for a while. Her room at the hostel where she lived was empty. No note. The police made inquiries. Nothing came of it. In Berlin, a programmer named Lisa Fischer vanished between leaving her office and arriving home. Security footage showed her walking toward the U-Bahn. She never emerged at her usual station. Searches of the tunnels found nothing. Her parents hired a private investigator who ran out of leads after 3 months. In New York, a dancer named Mia Rivera missed rehearsal at a Soho studio. Her roommate reported her missing after 4 days. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her social media went dark. The detective assigned to her case worked it hard for a while, then had to move on to fresher leads. The trail went cold. Miami, Seoul, Melbourne, Singapore, different cities, different women, different circumstances. The cases went cold almost immediately, treated as runaways, accidents, or unfortunate coincidences. Statistics, the investigators told families. In cities this size, people disappear. Some come back. Many don't. It's terrible, but it's true. We'll keep the case open. We'll call if anything comes up. Nothing came up. Until someone finally made a connection no algorithm ever did. Her name was Detective Rachel Parker from the NYPD Missing Persons Unit. She had a reputation for being thorough to the point of obsession. When she couldn't sleep, she reviewed cold cases. When she couldn't stop thinking about a missing woman, she built timelines. The connection hit her at 2 in the morning while she was scrolling through an art blog. The dates. Every disappearance happened weeks before a new sculpture was unveiled. Emma Mitchell disappeared September 14th. Holt's London exhibition opened October 9th. Sophie Laurent disappeared March 3rd. Paris exhibition opened March 28th. Lisa Fischer disappeared June 21st. Berlin exhibition opened July 15th. Mia Rivera disappeared October 7th. New York exhibition opened November 2nd. Parker sat at her kitchen table, laptop glowing in the dark, and felt her skin go cold. She pulled up every missing persons case she could access, cross-referenced them with Holt's exhibition schedule. The pattern held across 8 cities. 12 missing women, 12 sculptures unveiled. Not every sculpture matched a disappearance. Some exhibitions featured older works, but every new piece corresponded to a vanished woman. Parker submitted her findings to her captain at 3:47 a.m. By 9 a.m., federal agents were involved. By noon, they had a warrant. They moved carefully. Holt was influential, connected. His collectors included museum directors, tech billionaires, minor royalty. A premature accusation would mean lawsuits, political pressure, career-ending backlash. They needed to be certain. The FBI Art Crimes Division started with the sculptures themselves. They couldn't examine them directly, not yet, not without alerting Holt. But they reviewed every high-resolution photograph they could find. Professional gallery images. Unauthorized photos leaked online. Documentary footage from past interviews. One analyst noticed something in a sculpture from the Miami exhibition. A detail in the fingernails that looked less like artistic choice and more like natural growth pattern. Another spotted what might be an actual surgical scar on a figure's abdomen, the kind left by an appendectomy. A forensic anthropologist consulted from distance photos and said, quietly, "These proportions aren't just accurate. They're specific, individualized. You can't sculpt these variations. You have to record them." The lead investigator, Agent Marcus Webb, asked the question no one wanted to voice. Record them how? The anthropologist didn't answer immediately. Then, "I don't think you sculpt from life this accurately. I think you sculpt from death." They accelerated the timeline. Authorities shut the gallery down quietly. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The official reason given was facility maintenance and safety inspection. Patrons with scheduled visits received apologetic emails. Staff arrived to find federal agents in the lobby. What they found wasn't announced all at once. It came out in fragments, leaked reports, sealed statements, vague press releases that said everything and nothing. First, there was the material analysis. The sculptures weren't bronze, as listed, weren't resin, as assumed. The coating was synthetic, yes, but underneath. The FBI's statement was carefully worded. Human biological material has been detected. The art world reeled. Critics issued statements. Collectors demanded answers. Holt's gallery representatives claimed ignorance, shock, betrayal. Then came the deeper analysis. The sculptures weren't created from bodies. They were bodies altered, preserved, and reshaped into art. The preservation method was sophisticated. A combination of plastination, the technique used in medical exhibitions, and a proprietary polymer coating Holt had apparently developed himself. The process replaced bodily fluids with reactive plastics, maintaining cellular structure while making the tissue rigid, permanent, displayable. Not randomly, not impulsively. Each woman had been studied, chosen, taken, and deliberately turned into something that could be displayed without immediate suspicion. The selection wasn't arbitrary. Investigators found surveillance evidence, photos taken weeks before each disappearance, images of the women going about their lives, unaware they were being catalogued. Emma leaving her university library, Sophie wiping down tables at the cafe, Lisa walking her usual route to the U-Bahn. Holt had followed them, learned their patterns, chosen the moment of vulnerability. The art wasn't hiding the crime. It was the crime. The gallery remained closed. Federal agents photographed every angle, cataloged every detail. Forensic teams took samples. Dental records were pulled. DNA was extracted where possible, though the preservation process made it difficult. 6 sculptures were positively identified within the first week, including the one that started everything, the face that someone had recognized from a missing poster. Her name was Mia Rivera. She'd been missing for 2 years. Her family had never stopped searching. Now they knew where she'd been the entire time. On display, in a gallery in Manhattan, viewed by thousands, praised by critics. One of her brothers, in a statement read by the family's attorney, said simply, "We visited that gallery. We walked past her. We didn't know." But the most disturbing discovery wasn't in the gallery. It was in Holt's private studio, a warehouse space in Red Hook that he'd rented under a shell company, a place no one from his professional life had ever seen. The notebooks were found in a locked cabinet, 47 of them dating back 12 years. Handwritten, detailed, methodical. He didn't write about violence. He wrote about control, about stopping movement, stopping time, stopping resistance. Page after page of observations. Philosophical treatises on permanence, sketches of bodies in various positions, notes on preservation techniques, chemical formulas, temperature requirements, time needed for the process to complete, and reflections, always reflections. Movement is chaos. One entry read, "Stillness is perfection. The human form is most beautiful when it accepts its final position." Another, "They continue to exist, but without the burden of change. I've given them immortality. I've given them purpose." And another, more chilling, "Art is decision. The artist decides when the piece is complete. I simply extended that principle. I decide when they are complete." He believed art shouldn't imitate life. It should end it at its most perfect moment. Every sculpture was his decision about when someone's life was finished. Not ended in anger. Not ended in passion. Ended because he had decided the aesthetic moment had arrived. One notebook contained a ranking system, how he chose his subjects. Points for proportions, for facial symmetry, for what he called expressive potential. Clinical, cold. A rubric for selection, as if he were curating an exhibition rather than choosing victims. The notebooks never used the word murder. They used words like completion and preservation and perfection achieved. Psychologists who reviewed the material said it was one of the most disturbing examples of compartmentalization and rationalization they'd encountered. He'd convinced himself he wasn't taking lives. He was creating art. When he was finally arrested, investigators expected denial. They'd prepared for a long interview process, for a lawyer shutting down questions, for the usual dance of interrogation and resistance. Instead, he was calm. He sat across the table from Agent Webb and Detective Parker and looked at them with something approaching curiosity. "You found them," he said. "Not a question." "We did," Webb confirmed. Holt nodded slowly. "I wondered how long it would take. I thought maybe decades. Long enough that I'd be remembered differently. Long enough that the conversation would change." "The conversation," Parker repeated. "About impermanence. About the relationship between art and subject. About what it means to truly capture someone." Holt's hands were folded on the table. Steady. No tremor. "They would have disappeared anyway. Everyone does. Time takes everyone. I just decided what they became." The recording of that interrogation was sealed, but fragments leaked. He explained his process without emotion, selected for aesthetic qualities, followed them to learn their patterns, chose the moment of isolation, used sedation first. He wasn't cruel, he insisted. They didn't suffer, he said. The process was quick. Then came the preservation, the transformation, the completion. "I never saw myself as a killer," he told them. "I saw myself as a preserver. There's a difference." "What difference?" Parker asked. "Intent," Holt replied. "I wasn't destroying. I was immortalizing. Every one of them will be remembered now. They'll exist as long as art exists. Without me, they would have lived ordinary lives and been forgotten. I gave them significance." That statement made it clear this was never about art. It was about ownership, about control, about having the power to decide not just how someone looked, but whether they continued to exist at all. About transforming human beings into objects. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. He answered every question, showed no remorse, explained his philosophy as if expecting understanding, or at least appreciation for the consistency of his vision. When they finally let him out, he asked if his sculptures would be preserved. "For evidence," he clarified. "For posterity. They're still art regardless of how they were made. History should remember them." No one answered. The sculptures were destroyed. Not immediately. First came months of documentation, analysis, identification. Families had to be notified. Remains had to be returned, when possible, to those who loved them. The destruction was done privately, with dignity, with family representatives present if they wished. Each woman was finally laid to rest on her own terms. The exhibitions were erased. Gallery websites removed all references. Catalogs were pulled from circulation. Museums issued statements about thorough vetting procedures and implemented new authentication policies. The galleries refused to acknowledge they ever displayed them. Some critics argued for preservation, not of the sculptures themselves, but of documentation. For understanding, they said. For education. To prevent it from happening again. Others argued that any preservation was violation. That these women deserved to be remembered as they were in life, not as they'd been rendered in death. The debate continues, but the disappearances are still being revisited. Detective Parker never closed the file. She built a database of unsolved missing persons cases in cities where Holt traveled before he became famous. Before he had a name. Before anyone was watching. The earliest notebook dated back 12 years. His first exhibition was 8 years ago. Where were his first attempts? Who were his early experiments? How many more might there be? And sometimes, families come forward years later saying the same thing. They didn't know what happened to their loved one until they saw a photograph of a sculpture that no longer exists. A detail they recognize. A scar. A gesture. The exact way someone held their shoulders. These families now face an impossible grief. Confirmation, but too late. Answers that can never bring comfort. The knowledge that someone they loved was displayed, admired, praised, while they were searching, hoping, refusing to give up. Marcus Holt was convicted on 12 counts of first-degree murder. He showed no reaction when the verdict was read. At sentencing, he was given the opportunity to make a statement. He stood and said, "Art is eternal. I made something eternal. You can judge the method, but you cannot deny the result. In destroying them, you proved my point. You couldn't let them exist because they were too real, because they forced you to confront what you always ignore, that every person is already a sculpture in progress, already becoming still, already moving toward their final form. I simply chose the form. That was my art. That was my gift." The judge sentenced him to 12 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. As they led him away, he looked back at the gallery of photographs the prosecution had displayed, the women as they were in life, smiling, vital, human. He looked at them the way someone might look at rough sketches before the final masterpiece. And he smiled. The warehouse in Red Hook was demolished. The gallery in Manhattan is now a boutique hotel. The notebooks are sealed in an evidence facility, accessible only to forensic psychologists and criminal profilers studying extreme cases. Detective Parker still gets calls. From families. From investigators in other cities. From people who saw something in an old photograph and can't shake the feeling that they recognize the face. The final count remains uncertain. 12 confirmed. 8 more under investigation. Dozens of cold cases being reviewed. And sometimes, in cities where he traveled, exhibited, was celebrated, people find themselves looking at old photographs from gallery openings and seeing faces in the background. Faces that might have been studying the crowd. Choosing. Deciding. Planning. The art world moved on as it always does. New artists. New movements. New controversies to debate in glossy magazines. But there's a question that remains. Unspoken but present. How many people stood in those galleries, admiring the work, praising the realism, feeling moved by the emotion in those frozen faces, and never realized they were standing in front of a grave?